Welcome to the Art of Listening to Your Body podcast. My name is Dr. Jinong and I'm your host. I'm a cathartic release therapist, professionally trained as an osteopath, psychosomatic therapist, Western acupuncturist, and herbalist. I'm fascinated by the mind-body connection and how your physical body is a manifestation of your emotional state. I help people get unstuck from their chronic pain, whether it be physical or emotional, and live the life they truly desire, grounded in values and driven by purpose. My aim is to create awareness to the underlying emotions behind pain, injury, and disease in the body, as well as behavioural dysfunctions and mental imbalances that present. I do this using a unique blend of Eastern and Western philosophies and a good dose of intuition. Join me to learn more about the story of your body, what different issues may indicate, how to release emotions so that you can prevent problems, as well as inspiring pain story interviews. This is part 2 of a possible 3-part podcast. I don't actually know if we will get around to publishing the facilitated release. It all depends on how it goes and how willing this wonderful lady is to share it on the podcast. So if you haven't listened to part 1, this is a recording of a history interpretation that I did for someone. So I always find people's histories really fascinating, and I wish that other people could hear what happens behind the scenes. And so this amazing lady had agreed to have her history interpreted, and I sent a recording of this. She had a listen to it, and we thought that we would record a conversation and discussion off the back of her receiving this history interpretation and what landed for her. So this goes for around an hour, and these are the kind of conversations that I love having with people. There is a little bit of support and advice on an individual basis for this person. And we did go on to do a release. However, it was not one that is ideal to be published on the podcast. However, I was given permission to share this with my groups that invest in themselves at a much deeper level. And it will have a trigger warning for those of you who are inside of my groups to listen to the facilitated release. So you will hear at the end that we thought we had come up with a couple of releases to work on. But generally, when I'm working with clients, there are so many different events, people, and interesting things to release on. So I'm yet to catch up with this amazing lady another time. And part of what I'll do is check in with her body, just check in on what's landed since we did our last release, which will not be published, and find out what's going on. So there are some things that I'd love to publish everything on the podcast, but there are some things that I don't think are appropriate. And with my work, we go into some deep and dark places, and it can be quite triggering for people. So if you are in my practitioner program, this release that's not published will be on that platform, and yet to just see what other platforms we might put it on with permission from this person. So this is an unedited conversation, finding out how the history interpretation landed. I did not do this history interpretation with the person online with me. I gave them some questions to answer, and then I recorded myself speaking in the moment as to what I was reading. So that's in part 1 of this podcast, the most recent podcast, if you want to have a listen to that and see what you think. I'm very excited, and thank you so much for letting me do that. And I recorded you some feedback in the moment of just reading your history. And we're going to dive in to do a release. So I'm just going to recap your history because I like to work best in the moment. But I would love to know how you felt listening to the history interpretation, where I bring in physical, emotional, dosha, chakra, human, energetic perspectives. And yeah, just what landed for you.
I think my overall arching view was, wow, this is so deep and there's so many levels to it. And that was fascinating for me because I have a brain that loves that kind of stuff. There were some surprises that when you said them, I was like, oh, that makes sense. There were some places where I felt like, oh, I didn't give you enough detail to go as deep as you could have gone. So I'm happy to share any more detail here if that comes up. I think the thing that was most mind-blowing for me is that I've been told my whole life I was a pitta, but you said that I had some kapha, is that what it's called? And in the kapha part of it, where you talked about the inflammation and you talked about all of the different pieces that are in my body that I experience on a regular basis, like my biggest problem is edema. And it feels impossible to get rid of, and I can't figure out why. And there's only so much Western medicine you can take. And to understand that when you said to me, I bet your body is stocky. And, historically in Yiddish, we call that shtaka. It's a Yiddish word for like strongly built, right? And my dad used to always call me shtaka when I was little, and I wanted to be tall and lean and svelte and all of that stuff. And I wasn't. And it's not that I'm big, it's just that I'm big, or I'm not huge, I'm big and strong. And so hearing you talk about that really made me feel like so much more comfortable in my body. It was the strangest thing. I was just like, wow, this makes sense.
Amazing. Well, actually, because we may be using this to share with people, we'll see how you feel at the end of it, can you give a little bit of an overview of what you put in your history? So, or more just, your story off the cuff, what is going on with your body, mental state, behavior, etc.
Sure. So my medical history and my emotional behavioral history is complex. I, at age 40, was diagnosed with chronic PTSD, complex chronic PTSD, and I'd probably had it since I was 3. And I think that my body has been in hypervigilance its whole life. Like even times where I'm lying in my bed and I'm relaxed, I will notice I'm holding my shoulders up, even when I'm lying down. And I'm like, can my body ever get into a fully relaxed state? The way that this has shown up in my body over decades is that my fascia has become like an exoskeleton. I'm hypermobile. I keep, pulling things, turning things, twisting things because I'm not attached that well. My spine, I was told at age 40 that I had the spine of a 95-year-old man. I had to have my cervical spine rebuilt. So there's titanium spacers between C2 and C7. And it's kind of what's going on in my body. There's inflammation issues, there's autoimmune issues, there's, and all of the things that affects, right? I mean, it's like the layer upon layer upon layer. And I've broken a lot of bones. I've had a lot of autoimmune disorders, and I have been, I guess the biggest thing is chronic pain. And one of my biggest dreams that I said to you was to wake up pain-free one day, like to just wake up pain-free and experience what it feels like to get out of bed without like wanting to cry. And that's a big dream of mine. And my other dream is like to release some of this weight that it's not like I'm fat. It's just I'm carrying more than I need to. And, depending on what I eat, like you can see if I eat gluten, you can see it in my arms. If I, eat sugar, you can see it in my ankles. I'm just very influenced by what I put into my body. And so I try to be very careful, but we're human. And so, yeah, that's my complex history. I have everything from dry eyes to ingrown toenails. Like, it's like the whole thing. And I've had so many geneticists who are like, I think you probably have this gene and it's causing the extra bones and the fascia problem and the calcium stuff and the da-da-da, and they can never find the gene. And I'm like, I don't think it's gene. I think it's emotional. I think it's like years and years of like being around toxic behavior and building up protection and, you know, having a body that's infused with pain all the time allows you to stay in victim mode a lot. Now, I've worked on myself for 31 years to become this version of me, but I know that I still hold some of it in my body. So hopefully that's a broad enough history.
Yeah, amazing. And I will get you to dive into a few more details, particularly around the autoimmune condition, but I'll speak a little bit to that now that I've got you on the screen in person.
Yeah.
And what we're going to do in this first section is you've recently injured your ankle after having injured it a number of times, and you've had a diagnosis, and you've just been told by the surgeon that he'll see you in a year and you don't really know what to do. So I wanted to just have a little bit of a riff, and based on what you've shared, I've got some more ideas about how I would sort of approach it from a physical level and also just other aspects, and of course emotional as well.
Great.
So sorry.
Well, I was going to say what happened to my ankles and my wrists are not very well attached. And I've been turning my right ankle my entire life. And it used to be, I would turn it as I was walking, it would just collapse. And my ankle would roll to the outside. And I used to be able to like shake it off for 45 seconds and keep walking. And then one time last summer, I guess about 10 months ago, I got to the point where I turned the ankle and I couldn't get up. I had to call someone to come pick me up. Couldn't walk, and ended up on crutches, ended up in a boot, had an x-ray where there was no problem. I figured there was tendonitis. I figured there was, stuff happening with the fascia. I figured stuff was happening in the ligaments. It started getting better. So, and this is how my life has gone. So I just ignored it. And I went to Europe and I walked everywhere and never had a problem until I drove from California to Arizona. It was 9 hours of driving, and that destroyed my ankle. Just being in that forward pressure moment for 9 hours in the car. And when I went to the doctor now to get an MRI and to have them look at it, there's a bunch of things that are torn up, but what they believe I have is avascular necrosis, that my talus bone is not getting oxygenated with blood, and that when I am having an edema event, it gets inside the bone and the bone starts to swell, and that's why it hurts so bad. So that's what I know so far.
Yeah, it's all very interesting. And my mind, as I'm sitting here listening, is just ticking over more than, having read your history. And let's go into a few more details. But based on what you just sort of said, is I'm already hearing language of how you describe your body. And I think I mentioned that in the history is I even read how people describe their body. And I know that you're very aware of language, but sometimes it's so hard for us to say anything else. And I'm aware that when people are speaking to me, they will just use words, even though they're conscious not to use them day to day. But sometimes we know that it's not ideal to use these words, but for some reason, it just keeps on coming into our vocabulary. And it's a little bit like the saying when people say, just let go of it, just stop saying that. And this is where I don't agree necessarily with mantras and goals and affirmations at the start of someone's journey, because you can tell yourself, you can convince yourself until you're blue in the face, and it works for a little while and maybe a year. But at the end of the day, if those emotions underlying that make you feel and say these certain words are not processed, then they come back. So I think there's a place for goals, affirmations, and mantras, but not necessarily the beginning. And I'm aware that you have done a lot of work, so I'm curious as to where this might go. But these kind of conversations, and even just having a history interpreted, can help drop new awareness and new pathways for you to start to explore, especially when you're feeling a little bit stagnant and stuck with who you're meeting. And just even energetically, it can open the doors for you to start connecting with the right therapist too.
And you can imagine right now, my brain is going crazy going, what word was I saying repeatedly that I'm not even aware that I'm saying?
Yeah. So what I heard you say was that my body isn't that well put together, and my ankles, and there was another part of your body that's not well attached, your wrists. And so I'm already thinking, okay, what emotions are stored in that area? And the fact that a surgeon, or a specialist, had told you in the past that you had the spine of a 95-year-old. And this is where I have such a gripe with practitioners, and I hope I don't do it too much, but I think we have to be so careful of what we say to people, because there's context behind different words. And someone might just say, well, that's the end of it, and not even live their life because they believe they have that 95-year-old spine. However, I know that you're active and you're still doing lots of things, but sometimes we just cannot get those words out of our head as well. So how is it that we can process them and create a new belief system? Because our thoughts have a frequency, vibration. It's so powerful, and they can manifest not just in our physical body, but our mental, behavioral, spiritual, and energetic body as well. Your dad calling you Stocker, is that the right pronunciation?
Stocker, yeah.
Yeah, so you were talking about the Pitta, which is the Ayurvedic doshas, and the Kapha element. And I think I mentioned in your history is that I suspected that you've got this Kapha body, and this is probably the dosha body type that most people don't want because of societal conditioning, marketing, advertising. And there's a lot more being done now to kind of turn that around. But most Kaphas do not want to be the solid type build. And all of a sudden, this is where we get stuck in not accepting the way our body is and desiring something else. And, the concept of when we don't accept the way things are, then the universe isn't necessarily going to give us any of the good stuff. You've got lots of good stuff in your life, though. But, what else is possible because we're not accepting the way things are? And again, it's like, oh, my gosh, I'm trying to accept it, but I just, the subconscious keeps on creeping in. And so there's a lot of amazing gifts to having the Kapha body, being that solid structure. People see you as being very supportive, and I know that you're in a very supportive role in your business. But one of the biggest issues I believe Kaphas are to move through is to have the willingness to ask for support. So like the time that you really injured your ankle and someone had to pick you up, rather than doing it on your own, which is part of that Pitta, just being very fiercely independent, doesn't need to rely on anyone else. Then you mentioned about weight, and yeah, spot on. It's like that whole protective aspect, but it's where do you put on the weight? Where do you swell? And then I look at you in the chakra system as to, okay, well, what emotions are you maybe burying under the surface layer that the weight, the swelling wants to protect, because it may be a little bit too hard. And sometimes it's just about the timing, and sometimes it's the awareness and that willingness to really go deep as well. So is there anything else that you said? You have had some pretty significant history go on for sure. But I'd love to find out a little bit more about the autoimmune condition. So I think there was psoriasis, but you said that you've had a number of them. You talked about dry eyes, which is usually related to a condition called Sjogren's syndrome.
I don't have Sjogren's that I know of. I don't have lupus. I have alopecia, psoriasis, asthma, allergies, fibromyalgia, and Ehlers-Danlos.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. So
that's for now.
Dry eyes. I'm sorry, I say cool, like not cool, but yep, got it.
Yeah. I mean, it's really funny because I look at the constellation of things that happen, and I live a very vibrant life. So it's not like any of this stops me. And I remember my fibromyalgia doctor used to say that I was like the poster child for living with fibromyalgia, because I found out I had fibro and I went out and started dancing. And then I, had a bad issue with something. So I took up Kung Fu. Like every time my body tries to stop me, I'm like, no, thank you. But it's still, these things are real. And, is my psoriasis flare up all the time? Nope. But when it does, it does. And when my dry eyes flare up, they do. And when my alopecia, like I had my hair done the other day, and there's a whole section of my hair that's like these tiny little pieces, and it's because it's a whole chunk fell out again. And so I just, I roll with the punches, but I'm using the word punches, which I'm sure you're noticing, because it's the way that things have been. But I truly believe that things can also be different. I just don't know how to make it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So psoriasis, that's what I wanted to know from your history, is where do you get affected?
I get it. There's a tiny bit of it here right now, not very much at all. So I get it here and I get it here. And those are the only places I get it.
Okay. So it's your right, like the meaty part of your thumb and your right elbow. So let me do a quick interpretation for you there. So I always look at the right and the left side. Right side is your masculine, and there are many energetic qualities to masculine, but I usually say it's the physical, the doing, the driving, the logical, practical. Most people can relate to that. And that area is your base chakra area. And I think we talked about some other base chakra stuff going on in the history too. But if I just summarize that, that is about sense of stability, security, grounding, foundation, values. And things like foundation and values can also always change. And grounding, I know you're kind of in between places and you're grounded in one of your locations at present. And that's what your ankle has done for you. And your ankle is the joint before your feet, which are in your base chakra as well, and all about that literal sense of grounding and being at peace with where you're at in life, physical location wise. So it can have a lot to do with money as well. So security. Now, people can have millions of dollars, but still not feel that deep sense of security. And some people can feel very secure with $1,000. So this is all very subjective and, it can be related to money stories. And then the right elbow. So I find this interesting because it's in line with the solar plexus. It's one of the secondary areas. And solar plexus is related to trust, identity, self-esteem, confidence, power, authority, and ego. And from memory, I talked a little bit about the solar plexus in your history as well, which I hope we eventually get to share. And it's about stepping into who we are. And a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck with this. I did a social media video on it, is that they build their foundation, they have all that creativity from the sacral, and then all of a sudden, I've got to put myself out to the world, which again, I think you've been really amazing doing that. But we go through versions of ourselves and we evolve and we keep on changing. And so it's like, I wonder if there's this next version of yourself that is wanting to come up and it's been suppressed a little bit. And it's an experience and a challenge and a trigger to move through, or an activation. And the right elbow, specifically with solar plexus, is right side again, masculine. And so I often think of right side as career. It's not always the fact, but that perhaps there is some decisions to make, but you're just not landing on it. And so if your psoriasis is flaring up right now, this is what I would say about it. If it's fine, then I wouldn't worry about it. But again, I've got some practical suggestions around some things that may help with the psoriasis too, if it's an issue.
Yeah, right now it's not flaring up. I have a tiny, tiny bit of it right there. I don't know if you can.
On the thumb area, yeah.
Quite small. Just a tiny bit. It flares up when I'm under stress. And I'm not under stress right now. I have one rule in my life. I do everything I can not to be stressed.
Yes. Yeah. And look, stress isn't always felt mentally as well. And our body does have this amazing way of showing us when it is under stress. And I start to look at things like autoimmune conditions, pain in the body. For me, it was my skin as your barometer. And that's when usually people can start to shift to appreciate when their body is giving them pain or sensation, and recognize and be way more aware the many steps before the pain, the injury, or whatever actually happens. And, we had some messages because I have the right broken ankle, which I must say is healing. I'm going to find out in another 4 weeks. But we're like right ankle sisters.
And yours has gone on for a long time.
Yeah. So it's
as is mine.
Yeah, and it's interesting why we've kind of connected as well. So let's talk about your ankle and anything else that comes up and just like some practical suggestions. Do you have any questions that have come up after just...
No, I mean, I did a little bit of research about what a right ankle is about, and it was about spirituality and a change in direction, and also potentially an integration of more feminine energy, which is interesting because it's something I work on all the time, is the dance, the balance between the masculine and the feminine in my own life is something that I pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Ehlers-Danlos also, I thought there was other conditions, but thanks for clarifying. You did actually mention all the autoimmune conditions, which I very strongly believe are triggered by stress. You know, previously we thought they were always hereditary or a gene. And even if you had the gene, you've probably heard the saying of you can load the gun, but you don't need to pull the trigger. And the
right,
trigger...
we forgot Hashimoto's, by the way. I forgot that one.
Oh, Hashimoto's. Yeah. Okay. So the thyroid, which can shift you into a kapha state. So Hashimoto's low thyroid, low metabolism. So then weight gain starts to happen, fatigue, puffiness, etc. Do you take medication for the Hashimoto's?
I take thyroid replacement. So yes. I take both T3 and T4.
And does it keep your thyroid levels in check?
You know, honestly, it depends who you ask. Because if you ask traditional Western doctors here in Boston, they have a range that they want your thyroid, your TSH level. That's the only one they look at. They don't really look at reverse T3 or reverse T4 or free T3. And so I have a belief from looking at my panels over the years that I don't convert T4 to T3 very efficiently. And so I supplement with T3 because I feel like it makes me feel better. But I don't think that anyone has ever really gotten my hormones correct. I'm working with a functional medicine doctor now who I'm going to like get all those panels done and hopefully dial that in better. But it's been a challenge for me. And I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's 17 years ago. And I don't know if I've ever felt like my hormones have been balanced correctly since then.
Yeah, well, because it can have a knock-on effect on so many other things. And you know, I think the figures are a little bit different between Australia, New Zealand, and the States and the UK. But I know that with TSH levels, you're usually looking at it to be under 2.5. But again, you might use completely different numbers and measurements over there. So that might, I don't know what the conversion is. So if you can find out the conversion, that's what we usually look for over here. For less than 2.5. But I'm always really interested if the medication is actually controlling it, because when people are doing all the conventional stuff and it's still not working, that's why I say let's do the emotional, especially when you start to get into hormones and sex hormones. Like it can get to be a really expensive journey where I see so many people who are working with functional medicine integrative doctors, and, you know, some of them are amazing, but sometimes they still fall in the trap of, I'll give you this, I'll do that for you. And then actually years down the track, it's still, well, I'm a little bit lost because the stuff that is meant to work isn't working. So you can end up on IV treatments, expensive supplements, bioidentical hormones. And you can stay, I don't recommend like coming off them completely, but you may be able to come off them completely, but that's where I say do the emotional work and watch the figures change. And then you might be able to drop doses and so on.
That would make me happy. I mean, the idea that I was thinking about, you know, someone who was arrested in another country recently. And I was thinking like, if that was me, I didn't have my thyroid medication and they're not going to give me thyroid medication, I would die. And I was like, I don't like that idea. I don't want to be dependent on, I mean, all the other medications that I take that help me, I could live without, right? They just make my life easier and better. But that one, I would actually die. So like, I don't like to be dependent on it that way. If we can find another solution, that would make me so happy.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit about who told you would die if you didn't take that medication.
I don't know if there was a specific person, but I know that when like my mom had a nodule on her thyroid gland, and she had her thyroid removed years ago. Mm-hmm. So I grew up with a mom who was always on thyroid medication, and never thought it was going to be me, because the issue I have is nothing to do with a nodule or anything. It's just that I was having really strange symptoms, including like leakage from my breasts, and I've never been pregnant, never had a baby. And so I went to a doctor. I'm like, this seems not right. And that's when they diagnosed me with Hashimoto's. And so it was, you need to go on thyroid replacement, because as the disease progresses, it will eat up your thyroid gland. And the last time I had an ultrasound done, I have 0 thyroid gland left. Like there's nothing there. Wow. So I think maybe I'm not correct about this, but my thought was, if I don't have a thyroid gland, and my pituitary gland is, or wherever the stimulating hormone comes from, that I have to replace it in order for me to have a metabolism, because I literally have no gland left.
Yeah. Okay. And I come at the thyroid from a completely different aspect. So I'm going to clarify with one of my thyroid naturopaths that I usually work with, Nat Douglas, and just find out and get back to you with that as well. But yeah, sometimes we can get these beliefs because of other people's experiences as well, or again, if someone's told you. And so that's where I'm going to do my research and come back to you and go, yeah, okay, you might need to stay on that. But also, like, the emotional processing work has never ceased to amaze me as to what people have been able to heal. I'm curious, I can't get this out of my head, because one of your desires is to not have pain. And before I said, pain, quotation marks, is to me sensation. And it was from my experience of Vipassana meditation that this really landed for me, and it's just stuck with me, that there is a huge emotional component to pain. I mean, pain is real, and I have experienced it myself as well, but also that's why we get people on the different spectrums of the scale experiencing very similar injuries or pain states, but feeling it 1 out of 10 versus 20 out of 10. Have you heard of Vipassana meditation?
Oh,
no. Okay. I've got a podcast on it, but it is 10 days, no speaking, no communication, no eye contact. Everything's provided for you. So amazing for the couple to receive support. And I think it's incredible because there are centres all around the world. You'll definitely have them in multiple places in the States, and they're all run by donation. And often they're quite booked out. They run very regularly. And I just feel that when, I don't think it's suitable for everybody, but when we're there on our own, everyone's going to have a different experience every single time. But I think that you would probably experience this, I'm projecting this, is that you realize the answers are within yourself. And also, I've just met a lot of people, and I remember the first teacher that I had was, I'm going to quotation mark as well, riddled with rheumatoid arthritis, and gave his life to Vipassana meditation because he was sitting there more cross-legged than I was and more still than I was. And that's where I thought, oh my gosh, he really does see pain as just sensation, for him to be able to sit there like that. So that's something that came up for me. And I recently had a client go and sit that who had low thyroid. And I want to share this with you to sort of inspire you, and was taking medication and then wasn't aligning to the medication. That's something else that came up, is that sometimes I help people to actually feel okay with the fact that they're going to take a medication or that they're on medication. And even that acceptance can mean that they start shifting off that medication. But was medicated, and then December came off that medication, and the levels slowly rised to March when we started working together. It was at 5.5 TSH. And so I said normal is 2.5 and under, and didn't want to take the medication. We'd been working together for 10 weeks. Can't even remember how we got onto the topic of Vipassana, but she also went to sit a Vipassana while we were working together. And at the 10-week mark, had a TSH tested, no medication, and it dropped down to 2. So, not diagnosed with an autoimmune, but I have had clients as well shift and actually resolve their Hashimoto's too. But everyone's condition is different. And as you say, you've had scans to show that you don't actually have a thyroid there anymore. So I'm going to find that out and get back to you on that. So I do think for Vipassana, and maybe there's a bit of bias because it has been a really pivotal experience in my life. And if it's meant to be, I think you'll have more and more people start to mention it and maybe just see how you feel about it. If there's resistance, like go for it and see what comes out of it. Because I also think that
Vipassana.
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 Yeah, some people call it Vipassana.
Okay.
I will send it to you. There will definitely be something close to you. And I love it because there's no block, because you don't actually have to pay anything if you can't. And you have all these people serving you. Anyway, I'll send you the podcast link as well if you want to listen to it. But one of the best things is I didn't know that much about it, and I just went in and it was incredible.
I'm open to anything.
So the other thing is, when did your psoriasis actually give you issues? When did it start? Because I'm always interested in the time of things when they get triggered.
I think I was probably 20 or so. So when I was 19, I cracked my L5 vertebrae. I was an athlete. I was a springboard diver. And that's when I think my fibro kicked in. It's when the psoriasis kicked in. And I remember I saw this doctor years ago, and he said, take evening primrose oil.
Yes.
And for decades, I took evening primrose oil, and it kept my psoriasis under control. Yes. And now I really don't have problems with it anymore. Like, it's just not something that I have to think about too much. So I feel like the evening primrose oil really helped me. But it was really fascinating because I was doing some genetic work. I did my 23andMe, had it all uploaded into Pure Genomics, the database. And I'm deathly allergic to fish and shellfish. And it says in one of my SNPs that the only way that I can process omega fatty acids is through cold water fish, which I can't eat. So I had been taking flaxseed oil for years. I've been taking evening primrose oil, which is gamma-linolenic acid, for years. Yes. But it turns out it was probably poisonous for me because I couldn't process the omega fatty acids. And so now I take an algae-based omega fatty acid. And I have no idea if it works, but it's what I'm taking now because it's the only way I can get fatty acids in me.
Yeah, interesting. And I don't know if it's the omega-3 and the omega-6, or if it's actually just an issue with the omega-3 conversion. Yeah, because I think evening primrose oil is an omega-6, so that's why you may have been okay. And what's interesting is that acne, psoriasis, and eczema, usually people who have those, not all three of them, but have one of those conditions, or maybe all three, is they do tend to be low in gamma-linolenic acid, which is an essential fatty acid, which we need to get from diet. But so many people don't eat seeds and that kind of stuff. I remember a vegan friend saying to me, how can people not eat seeds? I'm like, well, to be honest, I never touched nuts and seeds until I actually tried to become a vegan, which I'm not anymore. So yeah, evening primrose oil is definitely something that I recommend to people with psoriasis if you have a flare up. But what's interesting as well is, so if it worked for you, great. And it's so amazing at moisturizing the skin.
I should start that again because I stopped it when I learned this whole thing about that SNP.
Yeah.
And I stopped flaxseed. I stopped chia seed.
With flaxseed and chia seed, the plant omega-3s do not convert as effectively, and especially if you've got the gene issue, which a lot of people wouldn't even bother getting tested. So you've been really thorough. So that's where I do say, well, the fish, and if you can get really well processed, like Nordic Naturals is a pretty well-known brand for fish oils to have.
But I'm allergic to fish, so I can't eat any of that.
Sorry. Yes,
that's okay. But that's the problem, right? Is like I'm supposed to only get it from fish, and I can't eat fish. So there's almost like an entire food group that my whole life I've missed, right?
Yeah. And I think I mentioned in your history, it's like, well, we'll just see. But yes, you can, some things will remain, and it's like, where do we put our energy? And you might not be that excited about eating fish and shellfish anyway. But there was also like multiple food allergies that were going on. And that's where I usually say, gosh, if it feels like you're having to cut things and you're getting new allergies, and it's so amazing that you focus so much on not creating stress in your body. But this is where sometimes it can be around like life purpose, soul purpose, and that it's kind of there, but something's holding you back. And so there's this underlying stress of your soul and it's like manifesting in all these ways to, give you these challenges. But also what's interesting, if, when your cuff is out of balance, I don't go into diet a whole heap, but it doesn't like oiliness. Because if you think of oil, it's heavy.
Yeah.
So you've got to pick and choose. Like, it depends on what environment you're in, the weather, the climate, and how you're feeling as well.
I can't do humidity. Humidity feels like pins and needles to me.
Yeah. And this is your pitta, and your kapha won't really like the dampness.
No, I do not like it at all. That's why I'm a California girl at heart.
Yeah. And you're stuck where?
I'm in Boston. It's actually not very humid right now, so I'm happy.
Okay, cool. Well, let's dive into a little bit more into, just your ankle and solutions. So I'm coming at this conversation a little bit more from a physical perspective, that you've just been told, wait a year. I would, for peace of mind, it's sometimes useful to get second opinions, maybe reach out to your community and find out if anyone else has had avascular necrosis of their ankle. Because you can read up on the internet, and it's good to know what they will possibly do, and give yourself this time and space to maybe prep yourself. So I try and get people to avoid surgery, but I'm not against it if it's needed, and then still do the emotional work to be at peace with it and optimize the recovery, reduce complications.
He said there is no surgery for this. So it's not that, there's no, he said, the technology is not good enough yet to do an ankle replacement or a talus replacement. So I actually respect a surgeon who's not interested in cutting you open.
Yeah.
For me, I've been thinking about chiropractics and acupuncture to see if we can sort of start to stimulate that area in terms of that. And, for me, what happens is, because I have this weird reaction in my fascia, I don't know if you can see it in my arm, like there's a big lump right there, right? And I get them everywhere, and they're not in the direction of the muscle, right? They go across it, and I have them everywhere. And so what I've noticed in my right leg is that there's all these fascial adhesions that have developed because they're trying to hold my ankle together. So I feel like in some ways my body is my bodyguard, literally.
Yep. It's like the armor.
It is my armor. I call it my armor. I call it my exoskeleton. And it's like my superpower. And it's also my kryptonite at the same time. Because so I spent a lot of time with like a fascial adhesion device, just like opening things up, because my body will respond to the work and it will let go. But 2 hours later,
it doesn't stick. Yes. And this is where I find it fascinating with emotions. And, if you were to work with a physical therapist, if you have a host of therapists, a lot of the time it surprises me. My clients say, oh, my therapist said, like, what have you done? Your fascia feels different, or I don't need to see you anymore. And, all the things that they were working on shifted because the emotions were dealt with. And so, you hold emotions everywhere in your body, not just your fascia. And even
so if we were going to work on one thing, that would be the one to me. Like, if we could do the emotional release around why my fascia is protecting me, like what is it protecting me from? I think that would be an amazing thing.
Okay, well, there's two things that are popping into my mind as I speak to you to possibly do a release on. And I always do a body check-in. The other thing is a conversation with your ankle. So sometimes this is like a variation where you have a conversation with your ankle and we go into your body, and depending on how you see the body, you visualize whatever's going in, and that's really fascinating. But also, there seems to be like this body parts thing going on. And yeah, fascia would be another conversation. And it's almost like I imagine that you're going to have like this fascia skeleton, like this other person of you that you have a conversation with. But I also just wait and see what will come up for you.
I'm game, whatever you feel like is the right direction.
Yeah. And then in terms of, just to direct you a little bit more with the physical, is making sure you feel that connection with your therapist, and you might use a couple, but just being wary, because your pitter is going to want someone who knows what they're talking about. They're going to want to have that authority and sort of be led as well. So pick your therapist, make sure, I know you read energy as well, feel into that, just be really upfront. You want someone confident. And, you know, you should feel and see results, but I'd be giving yourself at least 5 sessions. Some people would say that's not enough, but I know this is my approach when I was an osteo, is I'd want people noticing some sort of shift within 3 to 5 sessions, be it worse or actually changing. Stable pattern is not what I want. And
yeah, and if you could recommend the type of therapist I should find, like, is it a traditional physical therapist, or is it a integrative something? Like, I have a massage therapist I work with every week, but he's not a healer that way.
Yeah. So this is a hard thing. Even if someone said, you know, is it an osteopath? I'm like, well, it's more about the person and everything else that makes them up, not necessarily the profession. Yeah. But with needling, you know, I visualize that if I was to do stuff on you, it's like I'd be so getting in there. I'd be needling your whole body.
I want that.
Come over. I'd be needling your whole body and just really getting into that fascia to release. Like, I use needles. It was like a deep internal massage. But then you'll get Chinese medicine acupuncturists, Japanese acupuncturists, and they work more on the meridians, not always. So yeah, you've really got to find someone who I think is going to really get into your body, because your kapha, the protective layer, probably doesn't, like, it can numb out, which is why I think Vipassana would actually be an amazing first step for you, where it'll just get some clarity and sensation in your body. Because sometimes when there's a lot of stuff going on in the body, there can be dissociation of it as well, even though we know that that's not ideal. Yeah, again, it's, yeah, who can you work with who's really just going to get into you and maybe be able to hold the space for the emotional releases that come out when you have the needle stuck in you.
I do have trigger point therapy in my neck on a regular basis. I've also had radio frequency lesioning at a variety of my facet joints, just because they cause so much pain. And that, by the way, is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. In terms of helping with pain, it's incredible. But I do get needling with lidocaine. But like with anything, like, some practitioners understand how to get in there and like chomp through the tissue. Yeah. And some of them are just like, oh, that feels really tight. And I'm like, dig harder.
Yeah, this is your pitter that's like, just get in there. And I love searching for it. So there are still times for me where I
come visit you.
Yeah, there's so many people I don't treat. And then sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I wish I could just stick a needle in that, because it really could just be a physical element, but also like a big emotional release as that physical armor just drops away. Because I say to people, there's no escaping from the needle. I've had a couple of people be able to block it, but usually it'll break at some point. And I often question with the lidocaine injections if it's actually just the action of the needle going in to the spot, because I've treated people who had the Botox for their migraines and the needling was still effective. And I think it's all about the intention and the energy of the needle going in too.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, you know, these lumps that I have in my arms that your people listening can't see, I've had people try to stick needles in these, and they like try to even peel away the fascial adhesion. So I've had under ultrasound fascial plane hydrodissection, which is someone goes in with a needle under ultrasound, and they literally peel apart the fascial layers that are stuck. Like, I've had nerves that were trapped inside fascial layers, and you can watch on the ultrasound machine when the fascial layers peel apart, you can actually see the nerve escaping. And then pain goes away instantaneously. It's amazing, but it comes back.
Yeah. So that's where I'm like, oh, how, like, you could have that for the quick fix and then work on the emotions so that it doesn't come back, or you have a much longer period of relief. And same with like any of the fascial work that you get done, is that you get a longer period of release. But I'm really strongly feeling towards the Vipassana, for you to give that a go. And it is just going to take you away from your business for 10, 11 days. But I think you'll have some new ideas land for you as well. Yeah, so the ankle, I guess we didn't really talk too much about that, but you can always get second opinions, give yourself time, and yeah, trying to connect with people where they have been okay with the avascular necrosis. And this is why I get drawn to the Vipassana as well, if you're not going to like fully dive into the emotional work, because if you can start to, I guess, shift so much of the pain that might be emotional, you might actually be okay with what's going on. Now you've got stuck in your head that you've got avascular necrosis. It's like when I found out about my ankle, I'm like, oh, I've still got a broken ankle. So it's very difficult to get that out of my head. But yeah.
It's interesting. They gave me a cortisone shot last week. I feel like I have a brand new ankle. It doesn't hurt. It's not swelling. It was just like, boom. And it felt amazing.
Yeah. And it can be the reset that you need sometimes, but obviously we don't want to get too many cortisones over your lifetime in the same area. But it can be the reset that you need, because when our body's in pain, it doesn't often feel safe to dive into the emotions either. All right. So do you have anything else that you want to share or discuss on the sort of, I guess, more superficial level? And then if you're done, we might
on
move
a
into
body level. We talked about in the history, you read some stuff about fibroids that I had and polyps. But I think what you've explained is like this overgrowth stuff is part of the kapha. And that really helps me. I hate to be someone who says I need to put stuff in pigeonholes, but so many doctors have told me my whole life, we have no idea like what's going on with you, that kind of having a little pigeonhole makes me happy. So that's a good thing. And the other thing I'll just add is that, I dealt with chronic depression most of my life, and healing myself of PTSD and of chronic depression is probably the greatest accomplishment of my life. I think of that as like the children I never had, is that I had to raise, it took me many years, call it 18, to raise this version of myself and heal and drop hope and connect to a different version of a future. And, all of the stuff that I think is really difficult to do if you're a victim of childhood, anything that is severely negative. So I am pretty much 100% sure that so many of my physical ailments are representations of me finding safety. And one story I'll share is that—
Which is base chakra.
Say again?
Base chakra, and we talked a little bit about that with your thumb, safety.
Yeah. Is that I remember when I was in grade 5, and there had been some things going on in the family home that were emotional, very emotional. And it's cool if I had something come up, like a kid said something mean or something happened. I was a very sensitive kid. I had glasses and they were hexagonal shaped, and kids were mean, so they called me Hex. And that just like hurt me to my core. I would start crying. And when someone would say, "Are you crying?" I'd say, "No, it's my allergies. My eyes are watering." And I blamed my body for my emotions. And so I became very aware of this later in my life, that I had come up with a body excuse for what was happening to me emotionally, because it was the only way I knew how to cope.
Yeah,
I just wanted to share that because I didn't put that in the history.
Yeah, so good. And, some of this stuff comes out in conversation. I love the conversations that we get to have. Yeah, that is really interesting, that level of awareness. And bullying can affect the solar plexus.
Mm.
So that trust, identity, self-expression, confidence. And one of the experiences can be bullying at any age. And yeah, so one release that I would have in mind for you to do as well, and we'll see, usually I can only get through one, but we'll see. You're a pitter. Usually you can move through things pretty quick. Generally, when I'm working with people down the track, I could probably do 3 in a session. But yeah, that would be a process that you do, because the things that happened a very long time ago and the stories that we tell, I often say to people, it's not in the story. Like, you go into a release and it is fascinating what the real story is that comes through. And so many people are like, wow, I didn't know I felt that way. So you'd be going back and you'd be talking to those kids that called you hex and maybe putting them in a group and so on, and, you know, tell them where you're at now as a result of this, or if it still actually affects you, because it can be that little thing that starts to flow in different themes in your life or recurring themes in your life.
What was interesting, there's one, I think, appropriate story to share. When I was 5, I really discovered my purpose. I feel like I was born knowing what my purpose was, and I lived it. And then one day when I was 5 years old, this girl I used to play with across the street, we lived in this forest. I went over to her house and I knocked on the door, and normally she would just throw open the door and come running and playing in the woods with me. This one day I went over to her, she opened the big wooden door and she left the screen door shut. And I looked at her, I was like, come on. And she said, I'm not allowed to play with you anymore. And I was like, why? And she said, because you're a Christ killer. And I was 5 and I had no idea what a Christ killer was. I didn't know what a Christ was. I didn't even know I was Jewish. She slammed the door in my face and I went running over back to my mom, and I was crying. I was like, Mom, Kathy won't play with me. And my mom's like, good Jewish mom. She's like, what'd you do? And I said, I don't know. I'm a Christ killer. Well, my mother went marching over to that house to tell them where they could go. But I think at that moment, I was otherized in a way that most of the people who grew up in the place that I grew up were not otherized. Normally, people who are otherized have a different color skin. Normally, people who are otherized have an accent. Normally, people who are otherized have something about them that you can tell from the outside. I was otherized, but it was completely hidden. And so when I was in first grade that fall, I was going to school and I was 100% sure that every kid that I was going to meet in school was going to see that I was a Christ killer, because somehow this girl, Kathy, had seen that I was a Christ killer. And so I started befriending the kids who looked different. And I swear to you, that's how I got into the social justice work that I'm involved in, because I saw a busload of brown-skinned kids come to school. I'd never seen a brown person. I was like, well, they look different and clearly I look different, so let me hang out with them. So in some ways, like, these terrible events led to the life that I live now. Yes. But, you know, it's like, thank you, universe. Could I have done it an easier way? And the answer is probably no, you couldn't. But yeah.
Yeah. Why couldn't I notice this at 5? Yeah, and that's the whole timing piece, right? And sometimes some of those experiences and the pain of it, you're like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to be accepted? Am I ever going to belong? Belonging often stays in the leg area as well, like especially the calf area. And then these are some amazing younger self conversations that you can have with your 5-year-old self. There's like, you know what, you do belong and you have found your community, which is another Kapha thing, is Kaphas desire the community to feel supported, that whole tribe mentality, etc. And you're amazing at building your little tribe around you or big tribe around you. Another thing that came up is that you talked very early on about, like, you know, the victim status and wanting to get out of that. And this is where I love to use the release process that I facilitate with people. They learn to do on their own, because it allows you to be a victim and blame and criticize and judge and be nasty in a pocket of time that's very intentional, that this is where I'm going to put this energy to express it and get it out of my body, so that you are not dwelling on the negative and it's seeping through and tainting things throughout your day-to-day life. Okay. And yeah, that's the core of it. All right. So let's just have a little pause, because we don't know if we're going to be sharing the release aspect just yet. So I want to just thank you here, and anyone who does possibly get to listen to this. I'm very grateful for this. I always would love to share and record my conversations that I have with my clients and show people, what's possible and, what people say. So thank you. Thank you for this first part.
Thank you for having me. And as far as I'm concerned, like, everything that I've shared so far is absolutely shareable. I mean, I feel like the digging that you do and the space, the container that you create, so that I feel like I can remember things that I hadn't said before, and start piecing things together for myself, and notice the strategies I've used over these years. Like, I think that's super helpful. And it's a great opportunity to get to talk about it.
Make sure you go and have a listen to part 1, the most recent episode for the history interpretation. This is something that I am looking to do for people, just to have your history interpreted. So this will be an offer that comes up now and then when I have time. What you would do is fill out quite an extensive form in as much detail as possible. And when I receive that, I will do a recording for you based on what I'm reading and give you an interpretation, and you can see what lands for you. This does not get followed up with a release, so you do need to be mindful as to why, and be very intentional as to why you want your history interpreted. I bring in physical, emotional, chakra, dosha, human and energetic elements, and am partly intuitively guided as I read someone's history. I read the words, I look at the way people explain themselves. So the more detailed it can be and more specific, the better. If this is on offer, you will likely see it on my Instagram profile. You can check out theartoflisteningtoyourbody.com. And if there are spaces, you'll be able to click through and book this. And I will put the link in the show notes as well. And this will really be based on when I have time and space to be able to do the interpretation, because sometimes they can take anywhere between half an hour up to an hour. And the purpose is for you to perhaps start to see that some of the dots are connected, and start to open the doors as to what it is you might be able to delve into when you feel ready. Up until now, the only way that I've worked with people is one-to-one over a 12-week period of time. And usually I will do their history, their interpretation live with them. And then we will go through a series of sessions doing facilitated releases and various coaching. And in my practitioner program, I would offer this questionnaire, this history interpretation, as part of the training. And it was so valuable. So that's why I've decided to extend this offer out to anyone who might be interested to have their history interpreted. But just know that this will not be followed up with a in-person facilitated release session with me, because I did this with this particular person because I do know them and I know their background. And we had a lot of discussions before we decided to put all of this on the podcast. And there was a risk of recording all of this and spending the time doing it, and for this person not to be comfortable to publish this. And yes, I did follow up with a release for this particular person. However, that would not be my norm for someone that I do not know, because once you start processing emotions, so many doors open up, challenges can happen, and really there is that commitment that's required to follow through. So again, I'm very grateful for this experience. I hope you learned something from it. There is part 1, part 2, and there is hopefully a part 3 where you get to listen to a live facilitated release. But yeah, if you're interested in having your history interpreted and maybe some dots connected on the physical, emotional, human energetic, chakra and dosha level, then this is something I'm now offering. The link will be in the show notes, and you'll be able to see if there's availability if you're following me on my Instagram, The Art of Listening to Your Body. Thanks for learning with me on the Art of Listening to Your Body podcast. If you like what you've heard, I would love if you could rate, review, and share with your friends. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. My handle is The Art of Listening to Your Body. If you're interested in working with me, I offer online courses for the general public and trainings for practitioners, therapists, and coaches. I also open limited one-to-one coaching spaces throughout the year. If you would like to find out more, head to my website, drjinong.com.